Pepe Sylvia.
Yeah.
Who is Pepe Sylvia? And where are all these coaches going? Let's get to this thing.
Round and round and round.
You got a team, here's a word to the wise. You want to dominate your league? Go to Football Guys.
Football, I'm living in a fantasy. Football, got everybody mad at me. Football, cause every game I had to win. Football, I gotta be a champion. Football, I'm living in a fantasy.
Well, these teams want to be a champion, and that's why they have made coaching changes, and that's why we are here to talk about it. Cecil, Lammey, Sigmund, Bloom, starting with the Carolina Panthers. And what's the latest, Bloom? Mike Kafka?
Yeah.
Yeah, didn't we see Mike Kafka down at the Shrine game? Now look at it. Look at
Right.
Mike Kafka.
All grown up.
Might get a head coaching gig. So, yeah, of course, we already knew about this. We'll get to the teams that fired their coaches, but we're going down the coaching openings, talking about what the latest is, and just saying good morning to everybody, Bloom. I've missed your musk. Let's talk about Mike Kafka and his musk as potential Panthers head coach.
Yeah, here we are. We're flipping over the calendar for all but the playoff teams, and we look to the future. And we see I want to say this, because in some ways we are flipping over the calendar too to the show in its original genesis, right? The first Audible was just to talk about football, not to talk about fantasy football, just because it's all interesting. It's all interesting in part because it's always in motion, always in motion. The plate tectonics and things that happen now can ripple years into the future. And we see how teams will really see what's present in this conversation, no matter where we look. Ownership. That's changed a lot.
Ownership matters.
That's changed a lot in the time we've been doing this show. I don't know that people were as aware of ownership, even could name a lot of the owners back then, and understood how they were or were not involved, or otherwise how the fingerprints of the ownership now are visible on the team, right? Or even the lack, which also has its virtue. So we get to Carolina, David Tepper. This is, you say maybe like the first true like 21st century billionaire to own a team, right? Like a different, not from old money, right? This isn't an old money team. And what do we have? Dave Tepper is impatient, right?
Yes.
And we're watching this unfold. What is the pattern here? A bunch of offensive coordinators are on the interview list, requested. Ben Johnson, we're going to hear his name a lot. Shane Steichen, Ken Dorsey, Kafka, you mentioned. What do all these guys have in common? We're almost back to the cycle that Cliff Kingsbury, who got fired, we'll talk about that, got hired. And Steve Wilkes and Frank Reich, another offensive mind, but those are more old school coaches. And I guess we can see offense, quarterback, a lot of even some former quarterbacks on that list, right? So that's a priority. But then there's Steve Wilkes. I guess there's a larger conversation here too, Cease. What's the difference between the Matt Rule Panthers and the Steve Wilkes Panthers? The record, most obviously, right? 6-6, 2-7. Christian McCaffrey wasn't with the Panthers for a good part of that. Sam Darnold was. So it's hard to tease apart the variables, but the idea being that Steve Wilkes was good for this team, right? They performed better with him. So that's the road, the fork in the road they're at. And of course, with the quarterback choice, and Scott Fitterer, GM, is going to remain intact. We'll talk about GMs and the GM coach dynamic as we go through this too. But what we saw in the second half of the season was a team that can be competitive. And we can even think of some close games they lost, and they could have won the division. And this conversation might have been different. Is that arbitrary as we go into the playoffs? The idea of a playoff berth now, especially if there's 14 teams. But Carolina sees it's. At first, we were adjusting to how impatient and the itchy trigger finger that David Tepper has, but now it's kind of gotten old. It's like a rerun, and there's much more compelling stories as we see the new franchises in turmoil and wait to see how they're going to answer these questions.
Yeah, the Panthers will be better when Dave Tepper backs off. Like, find good football people, let them run the show, and Dave Tepper, go make a bunch of money. Sit on your piles of money and leave the team alone. Leave Brittany alone.
Right.
Leave the Panthers alone. And this is where the ownership conversation comes back in, because Tepper wants to beat Jerry Jones.
Yeah.
How's that worked out?
Well, that's the thing, Cease, right? I mean, Jerry Jones isn't part of the show, or Dallas isn't part of the show, as he reassures us that he has the utmost confidence in Mike McCarthy. Anyway, save it for the preview show coming up tomorrow morning, folks. Come on back. It's great to see you. But Jerry Jones, who really was responsible for the success of those early Cowboys teams? Jerry Jones thinks it was Jerry Jones, so he's never going to back off. David Tepper hasn't had that success yet. And you're right, Cease. I think that the overarching, I remember reading about Steve Biscotti in his book, Learning, and Arthur Blank got this message early on too, that the best thing to do as an owner is just stay out of it.
Yes.
Just stay out of it. But the thing is, if you have all that money, you're used to being in it. And well, again, that's the bigger fork in the road. Forget about the choice, the specific choice here. It's David Tepper taking a step back, but we'll see if he can learn that lesson.
We're only 5 minutes in and I'll start complaining about billionaires, Bloom. But yeah, usually those people are, I'm successful at everything. I know everything. I can do everything right.
I'm just going to put this out there, right? And this is for the writers, the NFL, right? It's a TV show, like our good
it's entertainment
boss.
Business.
It's entertainment business, right? I'm going to just put this out there. Wow. Wouldn't it be interesting to have like a couple of player-owned teams to compete against the owners, the old ownership teams, and just watch how it plays out? Totally different management style, totally different organization. That had a subplot that the NFL needs right now. And it's part of our country's fabric, really. So let's see that in the new season, NFL. Let's ramp up the tension and conflict.
Yeah, ramp it up. In Indianapolis, Jim Irsay. Now, there are people that will come to the defense of Jim Irsay.
Really?
I am not one of those people. Yeah, there are. I'm not one of those people. Jeff Saturday in the mix. Like, who else we have for the Colts as they look to wrap things up and then, of course, move on in a different direction, a new direction. A lot more of Jonathan now with more Jonathan Taylor. Like,
sign him to an 8-year contract extension.
Right. Just keep going. But yeah, there's a lot of changes to come with the Colts, and we obviously know that they're going to be looking for a head coach.
Yeah. This team, Cease, last year, the way the Colts ended, slipping on the Carson Wentz banana peel, Washington reliving that this year. It felt like it was Carson Wentz's story, right? Like if we look back at the 2021 Colts, we'd say that story is about Carson Wentz. And it was kind of, I mean, in the end, the team wasn't necessarily going anywhere with or without Carson Wentz, but they went back to the well, they get Matt Ryan, and then it becomes about Jim Irsay. And much like Irsay, the character himself, it just felt like erratic, right? Scattered, impulsive, and kind of gross, the way everything was handled with the Colts, kind of like Jim Irsay, right? And right now, while we're talking right now, Chris Ballard is doing his press conference, and this gets into the head coach GM tension, or the head coach GM. I mean, what is it? I guess organization by organization is different, the relationship and the power between the head coach and the GM. And in this case, it's Jim Irsay and Chris Ballard. And Chris Ballard, I just saw right before we went on the air, he said something like, I fired myself 50 times this year. I mean, this is like a melodrama, right?
Right.
I mean, everybody's wearing all their feelings on their sleeves.
Put Ballard on the couch after that statement, huh?
Right? Well, and Cease, I want to go off. And again, we're back to the original genesis of the Audible, right? So I want to just talk about football because I'm actually reading a really great book that the IDP show guys, beautiful gentleman, sent me. It's called Across the River. It's about a high school football program here in New Orleans. Edna Carr won 4 straight state championships, and it is in Algiers. And the violence and death of young African Americans in New Orleans is just senseless and absurd. And it's more senseless and more absurd. It's intertwined into the story. It's intertwined into every story where we're talking about these high school bands that are in Mardi Gras parades. Anyway, Cease, they had something, the Pride Panel, which is like the 14 most important players on the team. And they would meet sometimes late into the night. And it was all about honesty, emotional and personal honesty. And that was where what they forged in that room, It's where they decided the team captains and things like that. But the point is that stuff, like, I think what we don't understand about football played at the highest levels of high school, college, pro, it's the level of commitment and the relationship between the people involved, right? It's much more intense than a lot of things that we've ever experienced, but it's usually kept internal. It's, it's kept inside. When it spills out, something's wrong, right?
When it boils over, it's a pressure cooker. It's a literal pressure cooker on multiple levels.
Yeah. So with the Colts, it's just like a melodrama, right? It's like when the people across the street from you are fighting and it spills out into the street and you're like watching it, like, a breakdown of the family. So what's going to happen here? They're looking to the north, to Detroit, and that's a happy family right now, right? What a great way for that season to end, even though it didn't end with the playoffs. And they're looking at Ben Johnson, they're looking at Aaron Glenn. We know that those are both going to be hot names. They're looking at Raheem Morris. He's coming to Denver too. Shane Steichen, that name comes up again. But the bigger question here, I kind of remember the year that Arizona hired Kingsbury, where it's like, well, does it matter if Chris Ballard's still there? As he's saying, I fired myself. Well, can you actually, are those binding? Are any of those actually, are you fired now? So that the organization can really start over. They have a big choice at number 4.
Reminds me of Jacksonville with Trent Baalke.
Yeah. Well, you see, there has to be a conversation between Chicago, and Ballard right now, right? With Chicago at the number 1 pick. We could get, and we'll talk about the fields. Chase Stewart has been banging the drum that Chicago really needs to think about whether they want to take Bryce Young at number 1 and trade Justin Fields. Think about it. Just consider it. You have to consider it. You have to. Meanwhile, here's Indianapolis that if Chicago wants to trade down, probably with Houston taking quarterback, they can get one of those top 2 defenders at number 4. This is kind of like what was supposed to help Indy so much because they had Andrew Luck when they got Quentin Nelson. Remember, they just reaped all these riches because they didn't need a quarterback. So Indy needs a quarterback. Chris Ballard's going to make that call. And what have we learned about Chris Ballard in the 6-7 years he's been there, Cease? It just feels like he's not willing to do anything bold, right?
Right.
He's so conservative. So this is a time in their franchise's arc that, again, Jim Irsay needs to step back. And there's been all kinds of stuff written. Cease, we haven't even got into this. There's all kinds of tell-all stuff written about the Colts this year. Like, you thought hearing about Carson Wentz at the end of the year was like, ooh, who's telling on who? Everyone's telling on everybody right now with this Colts flaming true dumpster fire. So yeah, they're going to hire a coach, but I think Chris Ballard, even though he fired himself so many times, is still going to be there. And we'll just see if this can get less gross, if this can look a little more like a franchise that has direction.
Ownership matters. And, less gross? I don't think so. It's going to be Indy. And Chris Ballard is so risk averse. He'll go like bungee jumping, but it'll be in front of a green screen.
Sure.
That
actually sounds like that's fun. You put the Oculus.
He'll go motorcycle racing, but it'll be at Dave and Buster's on the arcade motorcycles, right? They can only
bumper
go
bowling
this far. Right, exactly. Don't get too far out there. That's Chris Ballard, ladies and gentlemen. That's what you get. Denver Broncos is what you get now. The Broncos show. And
is there some tea brewing?
Oh yeah. There's plenty of tea brewing. And there's plenty of you're going to hear some Russell Wilson stories coming up in
more.
The near
What's
future.
crazy is it's not cutting off. It's actually getting. It feels like it's getting more intense now.
Yeah.
So this goes back to like you keep that inside, right? So that we've heard about the parking spaces and the meals and whatever. It's really has become part of the overarching Russell Wilson narrative, and it's not just not going away. I think it's becoming more front and center.
Yes. Yeah. And as players move on that arguably don't want to be there anymore because of Russell Wilson, allegedly, or whatever I have to say, like, we're going to hear more of that. So it'll be interesting to see who stays.
Yeah.
And wants to be a part of this team. And I know the players that do. And we'll see who wants to leave because of Russell Wilson. I know some of those players do. Anyway, but it comes into the coaching conversation because he's going to have to fix Russ. As I saw your buddy and mine, Nick Ferguson, yesterday. He's like, he's not a car, Cecil. You don't need to fix him. Like, or a dog. I think Nick said it was a car or a dog. But anyway, you'll have to fix Russell Wilson. And who goes into that coaching search? Who goes into that coaching change? Dan Quinn, Brian Schottenheimer. I think the safe money. If I was Chris Ballard and I was sitting in Vegas, because Chris Ballard only plays the corners if you're playing roulette. But if I'm putting my chips on anything, it's going to be Dan Quinn and Brian Schottenheimer, with Russell connections and fix Russell and all that. But it goes beyond that. Plus, this is Greg Penner's decision. This is not George Paton's decision. I think it's a bad look when George Paton at his post firing Hackett press conference was like, we interviewed 10 guys last year. I wish I would have interviewed 20. Like, you can't make a decision. Right. You can't make a decision, bro. And the decision you made was Nathaniel Hackett. Anyway, so lots to get to. Of course, Jim Harbaugh basically saying he'll coach Denver if they offer him the job, which is interesting that he would take that stance. Bloom, we're in the leverage talk, right? It's all about leverage with these guys. Sean Payton, the reports there that the Broncos and Saints have already, they're okay with the compensation that would need to take place. And we're talking about multiple picks. Denver only has their first rounder. They don't have their second rounder. And it's not even their first rounder because Seattle gets that number 5. They've got San Francisco's first rounder, which is what, 32? Anyway, okay, the Sean Payton thing's interesting. So Payton, Harbaugh, you got all these star-studded names for the Broncos. And in the end, it's probably going to be Dan Quinn.
Right. All the themes are here, Cease. Ownership, the GM, head coach tension, right? Again, doesn't matter if George Payton is still the GM. This is a good one. This is a good conversation, Cease. And I guess Evero is going to get an interview. Yeah.
Yeah, and whoever's hired should keep him around as DC, but he'll get a head coaching interview.
And Morris.
He's Raheem Morris there.
Quinn.
Evero reminds me of what you see. It's almost like it's a year too soon for him, but he's one of those okay, get him in the cycle because he's going to be a head coach.
Right.
I say for him, he waits if he can and stays as the DC because if the offense gets better and that defense is still got a bunch of teeth, then Evero's summer stock is even going to be incredibly higher.
Yeah, and see, again, the story behind the scenes here is, it's funny to think about the Denver-Seattle trade, because maybe where Denver messed up is they listened to us. They listened to everybody out there who don't know anything about anything saying, oh, you can make it about Russ now. Your team is about Russ. And what did Seattle do when they had Russ? So it's just about the defense. It's about the defense. And there's a way that you can play off that internal conflict to create energy. Heat, friction creates heat. And that can power things, and that can also burn things and burn them down. And that's what happened in Denver this year, right? Because they made it about Russ. And it should have been about the defense. It was about the defense. If you watched the games, you saw it was about the defense, right? There was a unit that was getting the most out of themselves. And even when a player would go down, the level was not dropping off. So, yeah, cease whether we're talking about Evero or Raheem Morris or Dan Quinn or D'Amico Ryans, that hire says it's about the defense, as it should be. It actually should be. Cease, you talked about fixing Russell Wilson. Really what we're saying is it's kind of like this. It's like if you ran some sort of business and there was somebody, the owner's son or something, that you had to have there. And it's like, what can we do with you? What can we do with you that at least won't damage anything that we're trying to get done here and maybe even help us do what we're doing, right? And it means you shrink down Russell Wilson's importance in the ecosystem, the family of the team. And that defensive hire would signify that. Now you have Sean Payton and Jim Harbaugh. Now that to me symbolizes impatience. It's like David Tepper. It's like, I want it now, like Veruca Salt and Willy Wonka. I want it. I want a Super Bowl. I want to win now. And you bring those in, that's splashy. But I think that also keeps the expectations high. I think that keeps Russell Wilson more in the center of the story. And when really Russell Wilson needs to be like Peyton Manning was when he won a Super Bowl with the Broncos, make a few plays when we need it. And otherwise, the difference sees here. I think what you've done a tremendous job painting all this. The problem is not Russell Wilson on the field. The problem is behind the scenes and the true sense of accountability and connection and togetherness that you need with your quarterback. And I don't know how you fix that. I don't know how a coaching hire fixes that. And then meanwhile, like you mentioned, Cease, George Payton is not a strong presence here, right?
Not at all. He's lucky to have his job.
He had a chance to play his hand last offseason season. This was maybe we can get Aaron Rodgers. That's your answer?
Yeah.
So the hire needs to be about, and the hire needs to be not about how can we win with Russell Wilson? How do you fix Russell Wilson? The hire needs to be who's the right person to lead this team to something that's going to work and be sustainable. And I think at this point, you already have your answer that's not with Russell Wilson. And I'm not saying you have to ditch him, although I'm open to it. We're going to talk about this with Kyler Murray too. I mean, see, again, we get back to like personal life choices and things. Like, do you take all the pain for your mistake now, admit your mistake now, and really reset? Or do you say, well, maybe we can figure out a way to work this out? And really, you're just putting off what you know is going to happen. And I think with Denver, Cease, it's the Band-Aid. Whatever happens here. And if it's Harbaugh or Peyton, I think actually that's a bad sign for the decision-making and how long it's going to take for this to get turned around.
I will say, how do I put this, Bloom?
Yeah.
There's one player I know that would be ruined if Jim Harbaugh got hired. One player, one starter, one Pro Bowl player would be ruined if Harbaugh was signed. And I don't think the Broncos know that. There are others who maybe aren't the biggest fans of Harbaugh. You have like a bunch of Harbaugh interconnections, either through players that played against him or
Right.
you know, what have you. So it would be very interesting.
See, let's go off on a quick tangent here with Harbaugh.
Yeah.
Is it good to get Jim Harbaugh right now? I mean, do you want him at this point in his career? Is the ship sinking and he's just getting on a lifeboat? I mean, what does it even mean to get Jim Harbaugh right now? Are you falling for his stuff, or do we actually take him seriously because of what he did in San Francisco?
Well, what he did in San Francisco is going to get him that second chance. So the timing of it, I remember I argued with D-Mac last Friday, I think, because he was like, he lied. Because the NCAA, talk about crap organizations, Bloom. The NCAA, we are really important. This is going on your permanent record. We are investigating Michigan. Oh, screw off, NCAA.
Right.
Sorry, Joe, but like seriously, we're the NCAA. And the DMAC was all up in arms because Jim Harbaugh lied. I was like, oh, coaches don't lie.
Yeah.
Like, seriously, we live in that world. Like, of course we know that. So whatever. It'll be interesting though. And well, we'll see what kind of truth.
And then there's Sean Payton
comes out. Yeah,
Sean, the most powerful man. Is Sean Payton like the most powerful man in the NFL right now? Like he's the dude who can really call his shot right now and down to whatever terms he wants. What was it? 4 years, $100 million. I mean, he's going to get quarterback money.
Yeah, exactly. Although there was buzz about Harbaugh being the highest paid coach in all of sports, which means I'll have to talk about soccer, Bloom, because I don't know who it is. Like paying Harbaugh like $25 million a year.
Yeah, there it is.
So there you go.
I mean, I just feel like between Harbaugh and Peyton, both of these guys at this point, like you said, are riding off of their past contributions. So I don't know. And Cease, do you have any lean or any idea of which way the wind is blowing or what we should expect? Who's going to emerge, or is it really going to be up to one of those two, diva candidates?
It's Harbaugh, but I think at the end of the day it might just be Dan Quinn. So that's I'm hedging my bet.
That's what Broncos fans should hope for. You want Harbaugh to get interested in somebody else and not choose the Broncos.
That's why the early stuff is leverage. We've been around the news cycle long enough to know, like, when you hear something, okay, there's interest, but it's also leverage.
Right.
It's to make the other people, well, I'll just go to Denver if you guys want. No, you can't go to Denver. We want him. So it's
like interpretive dance.
All stirred up.
Yeah, it's all sending these signals, like animals and mating calls and things like that, and we figure out what it means when it all resolves itself.
Okay, Arizona Cardinals. Now we're finally to teams that fired their head coach. Cliff Kingsbury is not surprising, except they gave him an extension last year. But him and Steve Keim both bounced. Keim to focus on health. Okay, that's good. Steve, honestly, just as a man, good, as we have grace and humanity, because there's a lot of things I could say about Steve Keim. Steve needed to do this a while ago.
Yeah.
Like a minute ago. So yes, I think in 2023 and beyond, Bloom, if all of us were to like do something more for our health, our physical health, our mental health, I think that would be a good thing. And Steve needed to do this for a while. So Cliff Kingsbury's gone, and the next coach, Kyler Murray, all the conversation comes around Arizona. And well, the guy that they might have, this guy's already there. And I think if you gave Vance Joseph actual power, Vance Joseph would be better than people think as the head coach.
I mean, sure, why not? I mean, even when they're looking at this GM issue opening, they're interviewing internally. I mean, and externally. But I think that you can see, again, with ownership here, on one side you have maybe not necessarily a lack of imagination, but just no vision for the team at all, really, right? So now you're starting over, and who's going to be the dominant force to reshape, to create something new? Someone who was in the building when it was going adrift, because they actually had the better ideas. If it just could have been their ideas instead of Kingsbury and Keim, it would have worked out. I mean, that feels to me. I mean, I know there was a time that we thought that of Arizona as Steelers West, but that's like the bad side of just promoting from within. I think in New England, we're seeing a little bit of that too. Like when you just stay within the realm of the familiar, that's going to limit what you can do. But on the other hand, okay, they're going to potentially, well, it's hard to say. I think that what are we looking at, Cease? Is this a situation where they're going to hire the GM first and the GM is then going to hire the coach?
Yeah, it seems like that.
Right. So we can't, it's hard to even talk about the coaching situation. Sean Payton comes up again. And then Kyler Murray. And this, I think, is the more interesting discussion, Cease, because we saw them do this with Josh Rosen, different sets of pain financially, cap-wise, and investment. But you're starting over. So should you really limit the field of potential candidates by saying, well, you have to go forward with Murray? Because Murray's a tradable commodity. I think he is. And they're certainly in a position where they can.
It won't be in a year. He's tradable now.
Right. Well, see, you're answering the question, Cease. You're answering the question.
Hammers don't bleed. Hammers don't bleed.
And look, and I've said it's the Bidwill's money, because the thing is, they did just give Keim and Kingsbury these extensions, and that money's gone down the drain. But that's just money, and Kyler Murray represents cap room. But again, and I think, Cease, we've seen this in basketball and we've seen this in baseball to an extent, although baseball doesn't have a salary cap, so it's a little bit different. But let's just take basketball. This understanding that you really do have to almost go backwards to go forwards, right? Like sometimes you have to say, in the 3-year horizon, year 1 and 2, and I know the NFL teams have been successful at making faster turnarounds, but that's not the expectation, right? That's not the expectation when you're hiring a head coach or a GM. That's ridiculous. So Arizona needs to go back to zero. And is it with or without Kyler Murray? And when you're hiring internally, or at least, I mean, Vance Joseph's name just keeps coming up as, like, don't be surprised if it's Vance Joseph. What does that signify? I think it just signifies treading water. And while the whole Kingsbury Murray thing was entertaining for a little bit, in the end, it just felt futile. And I think that it would be sad for Cardinals fans if they just are going to tread water instead of considering giving this over to somebody that has a different vision and can create something that can actually last.
You know what would make the most sense for the Cardinals is to steal Adam Peters from the 49ers. Like that would make the most sense. Because I know Adam Peters getting some looks at GMs across the league. Ian Cunningham, and I'll do a shout out to Mike Shoddy, Bloom, because it was about 2010. And I think Ian was with the Ravens at the time, and he was their West scout. So he was scouting like CU and stuff. And so I got introduced to him through Mike Shoddy, I believe. If my memory is a little hazy, because that was a decade ago and I'm old. But like, yeah, man, you got some good people. Ian Cunningham's always been one of my favorites in the scouting community. Very hard worker, very bright mind. So Adam Peters, and it's funny this time of year, Bloom, because then my phone, which I normally hate my phone, but it starts blowing up. I was texting with someone about Glenn Cook yesterday and getting some info on him and about his, level of football intelligence and eye for talent. Because at the end of the day, that's anyone can watch film, but do you have an eye for talent? Guys like Glenn Cook, Ian Cunningham, Adam Peters. If you need a GM, this is the year to need a GM. Why do the Broncos keep George Payton?
Yeah, I mean, see, we're talking about Chris Ballard too. I mean, that's one of the things about this coaching cycle. And we can point to Howie Roseman. If you think that the GM, the change should be owner, GM, head coach, Howie Roseman, even though sometimes we've really doubted the Game of Thrones kind of puppet master stuff he was doing, it's hard to argue with the results right now. But otherwise, I hope that maybe, and I think last year, Cease wasn't there a couple of times last year where like there was a failure and then the GM, not the coach, took the fall. The Jets are going to be another good one to watch this tension to see what happens, right? So you got to have some alignment, but you also have to have some sense of an organizational chart and where the buck stops. And it feels like the GM has been having the upper hand in that in general. And I don't know if that's the way it should be. And I hope that some of the models, like Andy Reid is a good example, show that maybe you want the head coach to be, and not the owner, to be the most dominant force in determining the culture and direction.
The chef and the one who buys the groceries, and not like Russell Wilson with the two chefs. But anyway, the Houston Texans have made a coaching change, and Lovey, Lovey, he's old school. Seriously, you expected Lovey Smith to change his coaching style? Like, what were you expecting? Like, all right, Houston, here we go.
Yeah.
Back in the mix, and they themselves looking for a quarterback. I think Davis Mills would be a fine backup for anybody, but here we go, Houston.
I don't even know what to say here, Cease. I mean, Houston. So if it's like a boat race, if it's a race, the regatta, America's Cup. I remember when that was actually something people paid attention to. Remember that when we were kids, Cease? The yachting race was actually like a big deal. Who was the best yachting race? The engine broke for the Texans. They're just sort of drifting the waves for years now, right? I mean, they have no motor. They don't even have old oars like in the Viking days or something. They're just adrift. I mean, what do you have here? And again, Cecil, with the GM, Nick Caserio. So is Nick Caserio, I don't know how we can say this about the Texans and their hiring. Like, in no way does it indicate a sense of, I thought the point was to win. I was watching this George Wallace documentary. It was a good one. His second wife talking about his campaign. I thought the point was to win. I thought the point was to win, Texans. What is there going on here? So Nick Caserio, so the GM stay intact. Okay, you have the number 2 pick. And by the way, the best thing in week 18, I mean, aside from the Bills and Nyheim Hines and DeMar Hamlin and the love, the best thing was Lovie Smith on the way out and Davis Mills. Here you go. 4th and 20, Cease, and a 2-point conversion. Wow. How fun is that? Chicago, you get the number 1 pick. And Lovie Smith, Chicago, right? Lovey's a sleeper cell agent for Chicago. Still, right? Lovey. So, yeah, Lovey gave us that on the way out. You have a good offensive line, kind of. Laramie Tunsil wants, like, what? What's Laramie Tunsil wants? He's $30 million a year?
Yeah.
27, 30 million. He wants to set the bar. He wants to deal, like, he wants to do what Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams did last offseason. So you got to commit to doing that. And you have some other first-round picks. You have a few guys in the secondary. Okay, Stingley, Petrie, Dalen Petrie looks like he's a keeper. And that's it, really. I mean, this is pretty bare bones what you have to start with here. I guess in some ways, Cease, this signifies that no matter what, an NFL franchise is going to hold its value and relevance. I mean, it can be it can be a ghost ship. It can be just taken over by, it can be like squatters that move into a property. Like, I mean, the Texans could have no direction whatsoever, and they're still going to get TV ratings. They're still going to be relevant, because that's, I think, where this franchise is right now. Well, who are they looking at? Evero, Gannon. At least they're looking, the names are the right names, right? Ben Johnson, D'Amico Ryans, Shane Steichen. So we're not going to look at a recycled David Culley, Lovie Smith hire. It looks like that.
Right.
But otherwise, I mean, this is, and yet, are they looking down at the Colts or up at the Colts? Because I feel like they're looking down at the Colts. This isn't even the worst team in this division right now, if we talk about the state of the franchise, right?
Right.
And then you have Tennessee we're going to talk about. So good on you, Jacksonville. Urban Meyer was the worst thing, but your bounce-back relationship is working out.
Where's Marvin Lewis, right?
Right.
Does that seem like a Houston?
Exactly.
Let's just go get Marvin Lewis.
Someone call Marvin Lewis. What's he doing? He would probably only take, $75,000 to do it. So isn't that, save some money.
It's good. That's all right. Okay, we have a few teams with question marks next to them, Bloom. So let's step through these, and then we'll get to some coordinators, and then we'll tie a bow on today's program. The Los Angeles Rams are waiting for Sean McVay. Sean McVay so much reminds me of either John Madden or Dick Vermeil. I think that Sean McVay burns it at both ends. I think they should hire Zach Robinson. If anyone wants the next Mike McDaniel, it's Zach Robinson. So there's a tip for you, Bloom. But you look at McVay, he may just retire. He got married. Wife wants to start a family. Like, go be happy, dude. Because I don't know if football makes him happy anymore. Because the way that he burns it, like he's constantly go, constantly work. And Matthew Stafford's going to stay. All right, whatever. But Sean McVay might not. So the Rams, then, if you're talking about a Sean Payton, and again, we're going to get to some question mark teams in a little bit because the chat room's already on one. They're on one. That's right. But let's stick with the Rams for now. But like all of a sudden, if you're Sean Payton, who lives in LA, just go work, go work for Kroenke, make a bunch of money. So we'll wait and see. Sean McVay going to take some time away, Bloom. And yes, some of these, there may be other coaching openings, and it may be in a week. We might be doing Coaching Carousel Part 2 after the wild card round, but let's talk about the Rams.
Yeah, Adam in the chat room said McVay is the Aaron Rodgers of coaches, and that's a very similar situation right now, right? Like, it's starting to take a long time, but both Green Bay and the Rams.
I'm totally thinking about it, everybody. Oh,
yeah.
You have to say it.
Right. Well, but it's Aaron Rodgers. It wasn't going to be simple. That's okay. So with Rams and McVay, I mean, this is like the other shoe dropping. Chekhov's gun, right? Where we heard this stuff in the offseason. Aaron Donald, Sean McVay considering retirement. The Rams won the Super Bowl. Exhale. Matthew Stafford's commenting on it. Whether McVay's back or not, I'm going to be back. Okay. We know. See, this goes back to coaches lie, people lie. I mean, look. Let's be realistic here. Everything, or you should at least approach everything that you encounter in the media that we see, everything that's projected out from the NFL as like for our consumption, specifically with usually some sort of agenda or reason behind it. And maybe there are some things that get out that are just honest. Maybe there are some things that get out that are not intended to get out, truly not intended to get out. But everybody in this situation is obfuscating what's really going on, right? There are very few people. I mean, it's almost career suicide in some ways to be honest if you're in the NFL, right? To really be honest. You can't.
Yeah.
You can't, if you're a player, if you're a coach, you can't possibly do it for many reasons. I mean, we could do a whole show on honesty in the NFL, in the media, when you're projecting to the media as a coach, as a player. Can you actually be honest? So the Rams, I mean, at this point, can Sean McVay really capture a locker room again, right? With now we're in another cycle. Am I going to retire? Am I going to take a step back? And what are the Rams? Again, I mean, the Rams are, I guess, there's a larger conversation here too. And we've seen this in other sports. The Boston Red Sox comes up to mind, where it's almost like a franchise. You build it, right? You win. The Marlins did this too. You build it, you win a championship, and you sell it off for parts, and you start from zero again. And is that going to be a model, right? Because the Rams actually were able to do it. McVay retires. That's probably what Denver wants. They saw what Tampa Bay did too. And
it's just a cycle of, life. I'm thinking about bands more than baseball, Bloom. You'll be shocked to know I'm not thinking about baseball. Because it's like you're a wonderkind and then you're a has-been, like that.
Yeah.
Right? Because can Sean McVay, and you sparked my brain by saying, can Sean McVay capture a locker room again? He's not the wonderkind anymore. He's not the, like, this guy's magic, and he's not that guy anymore. And once the cracks show, this is another reason why you can't be honest. Once the cracks show, I'm thinking of retirement. I'm thinking this is so stressful. If you show that you can't handle it, that weakness, those players sniff it out, man.
Yeah, exactly. Again, Cease. And this is something we try to bring up, that organism that a team is. It's different. And you got to have a full accountability. And I don't think McVay can have that now. So we'll see what happens. But either way, this team is also headed to a reset. Stafford's not going to be around for that much longer. We'll see about Aaron Donald. And Jalen Ramsey is not going to be around for that much longer. But again, let's reflect that splashy trade, and in the end, yielded a ring, yielded a Lombardi trophy, which is what this is supposed to be all about. It's about it,
right?
Things, but we'll see. So that's it's going to be interesting. I mean, the Rams aren't so much in disarray because we've talked about these other franchises Even the Jets in some ways are in disarray. And what I mean by that is you're in a state that's not sustainable. You're in a state where things are not in balance. It's something's going to have to happen for the balance to assert itself, and it's going to remain unstable. And these teams have not not by their own design did they end up at these points, right? Carolina, Houston, Indianapolis, Denver, Arizona. But the Rams in some ways did by design end up here. So we wait and we see what's next.
Let's see what's next for the Baltimore Ravens. Maybe. I'm just saying, Bloom, maybe. And it's been that way for a while with Baltimore. It's like, okay, do they lose in the wild card round and the Lamar Jackson thing, which is hanging over this team's head for way too long. I mean, if you ever see how not to do something, watch how the Ravens have treated this Lamar Jackson situation. So I'm just throwing it out there. There's one Harbaugh available, Bloom. Could there be two?
Yeah, and either way, I think you're right, or we're right to bring them up under the heading of instability, unstable franchises, right? And we had a similar situation in Dallas with Dak Prescott. But isn't that just how? Here's another Jerry Jones. We can't help but talk about Jerry Jones, right? Here's another Jerry Jones reference, because isn't that just how Jerry Jones does business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the people in the building and the Cowboys players know that's just how it is to work for Jerry, is that he may like push you and push you and push you. And don't worry, like Dak Prescott did get rewarded for disrespect. Is that okay? Is that out of bounds for me to say that, Cease?
No.
That he wasn't respected in those negotiations, that his contributions weren't respected and acknowledged. And he had to do, it's like really, it's a more ruthless style business where you're like, okay, you want that market setting contract, do it. Oh, you want it? You still want it? Do it again. Well, I guess because of the rules, I have to give you the contract now, Right. But this is different. This isn't like that, right? This doesn't need to be like that. I don't think that from what we've seen from the Ravens and Steve Biscotti era, that's how they do business. I don't think so. But yet here we are. And Lamar Jackson is different in the sense that as a leader, what can we say about Lamar Jackson in contrast to the other quarterbacks that are leaders of the team, as we talk about Russell Wilson and leadership or lack thereof, is, it's the it's that quiet intensity. Yes, authenticity, quiet intensity that is very much the glue of that team. And make no mistake, if Lamar Jackson is not, and you hear it more and more, Cease, I've got to give credit to you always, Cease, for being ahead and being one of the first people before something is out there in the hive mind. You're one of the first people to say, like, this is going to seem off or outlandish to you, but this is the vibes. This is where it's headed. That Lamar Jackson is going to be somewhere else. He's going to be somewhere else.
Carolina,
hey, why not the Jets? Or why not these other teams, right? I mean, isn't
Tampa Bay?
Sure, Tampa Bay. I mean, isn't that the big splashy thing, right? If Lamar Jackson's available, if the signal goes out, if it hasn't already behind the scenes in the league, like, hey, Lamar Jackson's available, why? I mean, this is like when Peyton Manning was available, even with his messed up neck. Like the Tom Brady was available. Like that's a good reason to put Tampa Bay out there. So yeah, and Baltimore. There's no doubt, Cease, Baltimore and Pittsburgh, the Spider-Man meme, like pointing at each other. There's no doubt that these organizations, what they have is that sense of family and accountability, and coming from the top, and otherwise coming from, again, I'll go back to that book. It's on my mind, of course. And they talk about numbers, the certain numbers, 2, 4, and 7 in Edna Carr were like holy numbers. He's like, it's very much like the things we talk about with stories in the comic books and mythology. Like when you wear that number, you are the next incarnation of like a superhero for that team, and I think the Ravens and Steelers have stuff like that in spades, that they really have an abundance of like how much it means to play for that team, and how you have, like, it's a disrespect to the people that came before you if you don't bring what they brought. But then you have this breakdown, and some of it's financial. Maybe I don't think it's financial, Cease. I don't think it's the money. I'm not really sure what it is. Remember, Lamar Jackson represents himself. That adds something that is different to these negotiations than if an agent was in between the team and the player, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's something out of you, I think, that would make this make more sense. And I feel bad for Ravens fans because we can look at the lineage of Ozzie Newsome, like his last first-round pick, Lamar Jackson, and saying, this is your future. Like, I'm not here now to guide this, but this is the lasting resonation. And
Ozzy will always get a Keanu kiss when mentioned on this show.
Yeah,
he's a beautiful soul.
Yeah, well, Cecil, I'll just say, like, who can go to the NFL Hall of Fame as a player and as what they did after football? And there's like what, Mike Ditka and Dick LeBeau, basically, and of course Ozzie Newsome. Yeah. So it's just sad, you know. I feel sad for the Ravens. I feel sad for the Ravens fans. You know, we'll see what the next chapter is for Lamar, or whether that next chapter is, you know, in Baltimore. But if it's somewhere else, you almost worry that the team that would get Lamar would get him for the wrong reasons, or otherwise not have the same kind of authentic structure around him. But I think Lamar Jackson, it's so interesting. He's contrasting Lamar Jackson and Russell Wilson, because I think Russell Wilson's fingerprints end up on a team by what he lacks, right? By the absence of something. But Lamar Jackson's fingerprints will end up on a team by what he brings, by the affirmative things that he does. And we'll see if the Ravens can figure this out, or if it's even up to the Ravens. It might just be up to Lamar.
He's a real one, that's for sure. Let's talk about the Cowboys, Bloom. The chat room was already on it. They're like, Cowboys opening next week after the wild card round. So, all right, it is Jerry. He's crazy, and ownership matters. So, Dallas Cowboys, question mark?
Yeah, and why not Sean Payton there, right? I mean, isn't that what we all thought when Sean Payton? So it's hard to say. I mean, this is one season where let's just see how the games play out, right? Let's just see how the games play out, because if you are a Jerry Jones or some outside observer, it does feel like this team should be able to contend for a Super Bowl, right?
Yes.
I mean, this team
should be go out and get hammered in the wild card round, then
or even worse, even worse than getting hammered. Although that would be bad too. I mean, anything that's embarrassing, like Jerry Jones would love to have. He's a knee-jerk reactions I would not put past him, right? I mean, if they're embarrassed, if Tampa Bay, because they've never beaten Tom Brady, we're getting into the preview show here, but I think that this team should win, and if they lose the way they did last year to San Francisco, where you can see that they have at least more to work with on the field than their opponent, and they lose because of coaching passivity or being too conservative. Mike McCarthy, I mean, God, when you watch a Mike McCarthy team in the playoffs, it almost hurts, right? It's a slow motion car wreck, because you can see the exact wrong mentality to embolden your team to win a game. So I just think the Cowboys are at that crossroads in a way where it's not like these other teams where it's like, how are you going to fix it? How are you going to create something good? They have something very, very good there. Is it just that missing piece of the coach, and not strictly this? Because when we talk about the Achilles heel of McCarthy, it's a combination of tactical stuff, like the stuff that Mike Tomlin lacks sometimes, to be honest. As Mike Tomlin, we can talk about him. But also it's a more emotional thing, or like with the kind of leader that you project to the team. The two things are intertwined here. And Mike McCarthy's just not that guy. If you win a Super Bowl, you win it in spite of Mike McCarthy.
Right. Not because.
And if just Jerry realized that, well, Jerry hired him in the first place, so probably not.
Does Jerry realize that? No.
No.
What happens when all that stripper perfume gets in your glands? Hard to get out of there. Either someone having a party or someone got to do their shirt laundry. Anyway, fired coordinators include Todd Downing. Mm-hmm. Retired coordinators include Dean Pease. There's Joe Woods getting canned. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything about that, Bloom. Let's talk about the coordinators to wrap it up.
Yeah, Cleveland, the defensive problem. They're looking at Desai. Flores, you knew his name was going to come up as a potential defensive coordinator. Jared Mayo, you knew his name was going to come up too. And we'll see what happens with Cleveland and Deshaun Watson, and to be continued. Dean Pease, unretired, retired. Atlanta. And Atlanta and Tennessee being the last two teams we talk about, it's kind of fitting to talk about them together. Is intertwined, Arthur Smith, etc. But these are the teams also that we talked about this with Carolina. Like, what was the variable solve for X being Steve Wilks? What is the variable solve for X being Mike Vrabel and Arthur Smith. And I think it's almost indisputable, Cease, that they got more wins or more out of what they had on their roster in a way that you can say they made a positive effect on the winning percentage of the team. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah. And they do it with like leadership. Remember, these are teams to commit to the run, you know? And with Atlanta, you see, okay, 2 years into Arthur Smith, what do we have? I'm not sure yet. Is Arthur Blank going to be patient enough to give him a chance to continue to build that? On the defensive side of the ball, they have some things to work with. AJ Terrell, Grady Jarrett, Troy Anderson looks like he's going to be good, but just some pieces, certainly not an identity. And then you have Tennessee, and Tennessee also doesn't have a GM, by the way. Remember, they fired John Robinson in the middle of the season. What was that all about? GMs don't usually get fired in the middle of the season. Weird. And Mike Vrabel and what Mike Vrabel has built. And I think we can say, like, this era of the Titans, the Derrick Henry, they call it the Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill era, they've overachieved. Is that fair?
For sure.
They've overachieved, but yet there's a feeling of disappointment because of the way they've lost in the playoffs, right? They lose a game to Cincinnati last year that Ryan Tannehill should have been able to play well enough for them to win, I think. And it changes the whole story of the 2021-2022 playoffs in the AFC if that happens. And now here we are that they don't make the playoffs, partially because of Ryan Tannehill's injuries. But really, I think we could see the smoke starting to come out of the hood, although they did play the Chiefs straight up with Malik Willis at quarterback. So that shows you Mike Vrabel and the culture and what they've been able to build there. But at the same time, you wonder how, you have to hire a GM here that, I don't know, this gets into the head coach GM tension, Cease. I mean, is it someone that does Vrabel even get sign off? Is Vrabel at the table when they're having the conversation of who they're hiring here?
No, they'll get a GM that Vrabel has power over.
Right.
That's the unfortunate part. And especially if it's one of my buddies that gets that job, like, okay, because it's going to be Vrabel will be that strong personality. He still will be.
Yeah, it's going to be a team in his image, which certainly hats off to what they've been able to accomplish. But, and with Todd Downing out, I mean, that was just another promotion from within. And you don't want to knock it whenever Arthur Smith worked out the way he did, because when that was announced, they just another promotion from within, a tight end coach. They're just going to keep doing the same thing. But that they identified a good talent. So, with Tennessee, again, this just all circles back to Jacksonville. It's good to be Jacksonville. Seriously, the Game of Thrones story in the NFL and the AFC South, that somehow Jacksonville, who was at the bottom, Cease, in the years we've been doing this show, was there anything more embarrassing in the NFL than Urban Meyer in Jacksonville?
No.
I don't think so. Seriously. I mean, I'm trying, and
not that Petrino was embarrassing, but for the Dear John letter, not for all the other stuff.
Yeah. And now Jacksonville, I don't want to bloom you, Jacksonville, but you look at the horizon and what's ahead for this team, simply because of where the other three teams are. It's good to be a Jags fan. See, so you guys, you have your peace and love as Cecil and the Jags fans can all get along around how bad the AFC South is.
It's all about timing, right? It's all about timing. That's all life is. Like, pick your timing, know your spot, be ready when it is your time. Jacksonville, you're ready.
It's your time. And see, if they were, and it's like just luck, right? Because if they were an AFC East team and they had to climb over the Jets and Miami and New England and get up to Buffalo, the way that everybody tried to get up to New England for so many years, Peterson, Lawrence might be considered disappointments. Like, they never really amounted to anything. But because they're in the AFC South, this is going to get fun.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We didn't mention Vic Fangio. The chat room did, but we didn't.
Wasn't he on Sean Payton's proposed
super team?
Yeah. Well, and look, again, I think that we can't, I'm mentioning Dick LeBeau. I think that we can go back to, and we had our fun with Vic Fangio on this show. Sorry. You had, I don't want to necessarily call it fun, Cease, when he was there. Yeah. But he can definitely be restored back to his original place where he should have been as one of the defensive geniuses in NFL history. And he's like on the level of Dick LeBeau or Buddy Ryan, Bill Belichick, like strictly talking about Belichick as a defensive coach, where the way that they conceptualized and the way that they created their defenses is in the DNA of every defense now.
Yeah, everybody's using Fancho's defense.
Everybody.
every day. That's right. Anyway, that is a wrap, everyone. We'll be back with a preview show for the wild card round tomorrow. And so everybody stay tuned for that. And we just appreciate hanging out with you guys. And as more coaching changes happen, we will be here for you. Also, as more news and notes happens, we will be here for you. But tomorrow at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, we'll be here for previewing the wild card rounds. And away we go. We appreciate each and every one of you. Help us out and do those YouTube things. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid. And help us get us past that YouTube algorithm as our channel continues to grow. Let's grow the thing. So that requires some help, some assistance. And we appreciate your assistance as always. Watch the video to the end, all that sort of good things. He's Sigmund Bloom. You follow him on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. The show is at The Audible. I'm at Cecil Lammey. Don't follow me. Anyway, be safe, be kind, know that you are appreciated. Stay tuned. And as always, I ask that you stay frosty.